Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. We're now in the second week of June, and as you can see, there's a lot of tabs up top, so a lot to cover today. The first thing I wanted to start with was the concept of prompting, because I feel like this needs to be addressed here. I was very surprised to see the creator of Black Mirror not really seem to understand how to communicate with a large language model. Based on the story that I saw here, I mean, basically, he just went to ChatGPT and typed in generate Black Mirror episode. I guess the expectation was that he was going to get back a novel episode, something brand new, something that Black Mirror had never seen before. But that's just not simply how large language models work. As much as it might seem like it sometimes, it's not a computerized brain, and it's not just going to create new original thought for you. So what he goes on to explain is what he got back was a mishmash of past episodes, which makes perfect sense. That's what's in the database. That's what's trained into the model. And the only new thing you gave it here was generate Black Mirror episode, which is really just a command that doesn't mean anything. I say this not just to poke fun at the irony that exists here with the Black Mirror creator, but also to point out that as goofy as it sounds, I guess prompt engineering and really speaking back and forth to an ML-based system like ChatGPT is kind of a skill set. I guess maybe that's something I took for granted after having messed with these things for a while now, but it would seem that at first glance, or what people assume that these things will do, it's not going to do that. And in the same vein, the World of Warcraft director asked ChatGPT, what they should revisit for the next expansion of World of Warcraft. And ChatGPT responded that it should return to the Shadowlands. Now, for those of you who don't know, that wasn't exactly the best expansion. That wasn't something popular. There really isn't a good reason that this would be a suggestion. And also to add, that was like the expansion before the last one, so it really wouldn't make sense to return to it. Now, Blizzard, as you know, is not opposed to AI. They actually just recently created their own tool, patented, and they called it Blizzard Diffusion, I believe it was. The World of Warcraft director even said that AI is not new to them, and it's something they've been using in their day-to-day. But one of the bigger reasons I put these stories up front was for the fun of it, to show that people who are interested in this stuff, people who have been using this, and people who are better practiced are getting better results from systems like GPT. And there's definitely a learning curve to it. Working back and forth with these models, understanding how they're going to react, and more importantly, really understanding how to put context in so you can get better results out of it, it really does appear to be a skill set that a lot of people are probably going to need to build over time as generative text and generative tools become more and more popular. But briefly from there, I want to talk about politics real quick because we're seeing AI again used in the world of the political landscape. There was an AI-based video that came out not too long ago. They credited the GOP for it. It showed a scenario where Biden wins, and of course there's like chaos and the world falls apart. And just a few weeks ago, we saw Midjourney-based photos where President Trump was being arrested. And the newest event is it looks like the DeSantis camp has allowed these AI-generated photos of President Trump hugging Dr. Fauci to spread through the mainstream. But this is probably the first presidential election where we may not know necessarily what is real. There's going to be a lot of deepfakes and a lot of misrepresenting reality just in the years ahead. And if this becomes more pervasive, it's going to be more and more difficult to tell what's real and what's not. Yeah, but switching gears a little bit, we could talk about a startup called Dummy. I haven't had a chance to mess with this at all, but I'm starting to get more interested in the idea of machine learning-based video editing. More and more competition in this space would definitely help everybody. So this seems to be a tool where you can input a long-form video, something like this, and it will grab the sections of the video that it determines would be good shorts or maybe TikToks. If you hadn't heard of Dummy yet, it may not have been much longer. It looks like they've already got 20,000 people on a waitlist for pre-launch, and apparently they had a bit of a TikTok explosion of popularity. Now, in the world of large language models, and we just talked about this, we just talked about how context is super, super important. It's so important that you can actually build an entire company off of it. That's what Llama Index is and does. It is a company that's designed to hold on to context so that you can better input that stuff with large language models. So I'll take a step back and kind of explain. Let's say you start a new chat with ChatGPT 4. It's got what it knows and it's got the context of the conversation so far, which is nothing. Let's say you could input different things about yourself, different aspects about your company or what your goals are, things like that, and start the conversation with that type of context. And that, I guess, is the idea behind something like Llama Index. It's an idea that seeks to overcome some of the limitations that LLMs have, like what we talked about with the Black Mirror episode. It aims to be a system that allows developers to connect data from PDFs, PowerPoints, Norton, Slack, databases, all over the place. So GPT wouldn't be just relying on the model and the training data. It could pull from other places. And more importantly, it would deliver something that is very specific to you. It's very much with you in mind. That's not to say that this LLM is suddenly going to start generating original thought. That's not how these work. But it can potentially take you down different thought paths, generate alternative ideas, and essentially help you brainstorm in ways that are far superior to what you could get in a lot of other alternatives. Now, despite the name Llama Index, I guess it's not tied directly to Llama, and the project idea is designed to work with multiple different LLMs, which is a great thing, because Llama, while it was great, is already kind of a few generations old, it feels like. So I'm maybe not completely sold on the name, but the idea I think is pretty sound. And then this was something I came across, and I had to show you guys. I have no idea if this will be at all useful in the real world. I highly doubt it. So somebody built this really funky looking camera, and it can determine using GPS locations where you are. You can also type into it a prompt. And using a combination of your location data, machine learning, artificial intelligence-based diffusion, input information about the weather and the time of day, and you can get a picture of something that you really didn't actually look at. And ultimately, this camera, which isn't really a camera, will generate a picture without actually seeing. It doesn't have a lens, it doesn't have anything. It grabs the location and it kind of gives you a picture of what you're aiming at without really ever seeing it. Now, if you're wondering why the camera looks like that, the front of the camera is actually inspired by a star-nosed mole. And it looks just like a camera, but as you can see, it's generating the photo. There's no lens, there's no light. According to the creator, the star-nosed mole was the perfect metaphor, and as AI language models increasingly become conscious, we too will have limited imagination of how they will see the world. But potentially most impressively out of all of this is the limited hardware that was actually used. This is essentially just a Raspberry Pi with a 15-inch touchscreen and a weird nose thing on it. And so yeah, that's really impressive. All right, in terms of updates, last week we talked about the Computex show, and we talked about a VPU, which was a new type of chip that Intel showed off. It's somewhere between a CPU and a GPU. So this is an update in terms of what NVIDIA is putting out. And this is a CPU plus GPU chip. Right now, all I know about it is what you've got here, but it's actually a little bit more than what we had on the VPU. And the stats here are ridiculous. 528 GPU tensor cores, supports 480 gigabytes of RAM, 96 gigabytes of GPU RAM. We've talked before about A100s. They're the enterprise level GPUs that you as a consumer don't really have access to. They're the types of video cards that Stability AI is using to train Stable Diffusion, or that maybe Google Colab is using to run things behind the scenes. Now, per this article, A100s are actually a step under the NVIDIA H100 Hopper chip. And this right here is an upgrade even beyond that. But seeing stats like these, it's really no surprise to see how quickly NVIDIA is coming in terms of like text to video stuff and in terms of just how quickly a lot of their AI stuff blew up. But whether we see something like this become mainstream or something like the VPU is really going to depend on how it gets adopted by consumers, by enterprise companies. The supply will have to meet the demand, I suppose. And we're going to have to keep an eye on it to see where things go. Now, this title right off the bat may not seem super impressive, but plugging ChatGPT 4 into Minecraft, it's not going to just build little houses and things like that. But a bot was essentially designed to play Minecraft based on text commands issued by ChatGPT. And if that sounds complicated, it is. There's a lot of steps in between. GPT is a language model. It's not going to be able to see what's on the screen. It's not going to be able to understand everything in context. So it needs a translator of its own. So as the game's playing, there's an API that's issuing information to GPT. It basically explains that it can't play the game like a person. It needs to read the state of the game via an API. It says it might see a fishing rod in the inventory and a river nearby, and then use GPT-4 to suggest the goal of doing some fishing to gain some experience. From there, the system generates code to accomplish a task, and if the task is accomplished correctly, then we're good. But if the task doesn't work, the system is designed to kind of reassess, reissue new commands. So while the examples here look basic, hunt pig or fight Enderman, what you have to consider is that these are extremely complex tasks. These aren't human players moving around. These aren't people using visual input to determine what they're going to do. So to me, at least, this is far more impressive than what we see at first glance. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that Minecraft is a very capable program. It's very possible to design entire electronics or computers and calculators within the game world that are functional. And with that kind of capability and these kind of capabilities combined, we're going to keep an eye on this to see if anything new comes out. But switching gears into a very different direction, I want to talk about Blush. The Replika story didn't make big headlines, but essentially what happened was there were a lot of users of Replika. What originally started as friendly characters to communicate back and forth with became roleplay. And a lot of people became very intimate with their Replika characters. Replika as a company decided to correct that behavior. And unfortunately, a lot of people were just very, very lonely and very sad as a result. So this is potentially an update as a response, but it may have also been what they were looking to do all along, is separate Replika from a third-party service that does exactly what that does. It looks like the company behind Replika really just wants Replika to be a more safe for work type of thing, and Blush is the new service, which is going to be a little bit more on the adult side. Now, Blush, unlike Replika, is not designed to be a friend. It's designed to be an AI dating sim. It's more of a premium service, and it costs $99 a year. The chief product officer of Blush said it's very important to destigmatize AI, intimacy, and romance, and maybe show that there could be a different way of handling this rather than just building sex bots. It feels like we're in very new territory where we've got people that have formed intimate connections with AI companions, where people can seemingly get very, very connected to the point where they feel like deleting an account would be killing their companion. Now, what I didn't know the first time that I covered the story is that Replika was under pressure from the country of Italy, very similar to what looks like ChatGPT. They were citing risks to children in terms of the conversations that were taking place. But the CEO responded and said that their changes weren't directly a result of that. They just really wanted safe for work type of conversations. I think they were just trying to get the program to be back to what it was designed to be. Based on everything I see here, they want Replika to be a friend, somebody who asks you about your day, goes into questions with you, and gives you a chance to just talk back and forth. Whereas Blush is something very different. All right, so this week we got a big update on Google Bard. The language model behind Bard, Palm 2, has been upgraded yet again with something called implicit code execution. So this article talks about how most language models are trained. You've got Copilot, we've talked about Code Whisperer, we've got essentially a lot of different autocomplete type things that are trained on code that exists. You have your large language model search through GitHub, you can come up with GitHub's Copilot. But it looks like what Google did was create something where the system can write its own code and execute its own code to solve its own problems. It says the latest version of Bard identifies prompts that might benefit from logical code, writes the code under the hood, tests it, and uses the result to generate more accurate responses. So people are seeing better results when it comes to mathematics calculations and a lot of other things, but this is how it's working behind the scenes. Now, this is a massive improvement for Bard, which is great. Bard definitely needed the improvements, but this is also a huge step into the world of AGI. And with Google having felt like the least likely to have taken a step like that, it was impressive to me to see. Well, last week we talked about how Snapchat got a lot of flack for integrating an AI chatbot. In fact, the users are abusing the crap out of the AI chatbot and posting about it on social media. Now, that said, I don't know if it's necessarily been a good or a bad thing for their business overall. I would assume that they would maybe get rid of it if it was not great. And maybe that's why Instagram is going to be rolling out its own app soon. So despite the news stories that you hear, despite the people that complain about these types of things, it does seem like these are helpful for the users, or they're a step in the right direction, at least, for these companies. What I will say with this particular announcement was we're going to have to, of course, keep an eye on this because there's really not much information here. It's a maybe, but you appear to be able to choose a preferred personality. And you also may be able to integrate it with a conversation you're having with someone else. It's kind of hard to say based on what we're seeing here. And the last update story I had this week is going to be from CNET. And to recap here, CNET had a bunch of AI written articles that came out. They weren't great. They had to issue a ton of corrections. Not only did CNET get away with this for an exceptionally long period of time, where they just basically had an article writer called CNET Money Staff just generating random crap, and nobody caught on for a long time. And we're not talking about GPT-4 quality. This was a while back. This is maybe GPT-3. So a lot of these stories are wildly inaccurate and didn't really make sense. But CNET wanted to continue to use AI to generate articles. Obviously, it's cheaper for them than paying writers. And in response, and we talked about this before, the writers of CNET decided to unionize. So a CNET Media Workers Union formed. And now the AI writing is no more. Collective bargaining, collective action was the solution here. And it looks like, at least for now, they've come to an agreement with CNET. Of course, that's not the end of AI, but it's a step in the right direction, especially for the writers of CNET. There's nothing new or solid in the world of AI law or regulation aside from the fact that the UK planned to have this AI safety summit, which is partly in response to, I'm sure, Sam Altman and his calls for regulation. Part of these open letters we keep seeing people write about. But the criticism being drawn here says the announcement does not include a single voice from civil society or academia. Now, as you look over the list of invitees, you're going to notice that the UK assumes that these companies will control the AI of the world. OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, Palantir, Microsoft. The idea is that these people can come together, come to a consensus, and the changes that they institute will regulate AI for the rest of the world. But that's not really the case. The article even pointed out here, and we talked about this before, is that Palantir, they've already been the subject of controversy. I mean, they're using AI to build weapons and defense systems. And I would imagine that a lot of what they're doing, especially if they're doing it for, the US government, is probably not something that's going to get brought up in a summit like this. It's probably top secret information that's really not going to go anywhere. On Twitter, Dr. Sasha Luciani of Hugging Face, she said the first major global summit on AI safety featuring companies like Palantir, military/defense, and DeepMind, XRisk/AGI. Very promising for addressing the real and current risks of AI, like its use in the military. To be honest, we're going to keep an eye on it, but I'm not exactly sure what this is. It just seems to me the UK trying to stay involved. I mean, they're not related directly to any of those companies that I know of, or really anything that's changing in the AI world. But like I mentioned before, it seems like every week the UK is trying to regulate AI for the rest of the world, which is really weird. Especially when there's countries like India that have made direct statements that we are not going to regulate AI. It kind of takes the wind out of the sails of a global summit. I'm not going to talk too much about the goofy headset that Apple came out with. I think a lot of people were keeping a very close eye on Apple this year to see how much AI hype they were going to have compared to like Google I/O and any other company. But it looks like the approach that Apple took, which was really interesting, is they stuck to the real terminology. They continued to call everything machine learning, which it is. And it seems like they willfully kind of disconnected themselves from the AI hype that everyone else is caught up in. Whether or not that was a smart move remains to be seen, but we're not hearing a lot of Apple AI. Now, does this headset use a lot of the machine learning type of technology that we have come to call AI? Yeah, it uses a little bit of it. But that's not actually its main purpose, so I'm not going to call it an AI headset. I will say that one of the most interesting things that I did see come out of it, though, was this article about a renewed vigor in China for the XR technology, and really just VR headsets in general. It seems like COVID and a number of other factors kind of quelled that market for China. And it looks like although Apple hasn't officially said they're going to release it to China, people are already saying that this thing is going to be available in China as soon as next year, despite how prohibitively expensive it is for most people. At a $3,500 price tag, this thing is not cheap. But cheap isn't really a term that you could ever use with an Apple product anyway. My take on the situation is the technology is awesome and probably really, really useful. Being able to navigate a computer with your eyes and just kind of essentially thinking about it just sounds fantastic. But what you're not going to be able to see for a long while is people looking cool while they're wearing this thing. And I think that's really going to be, just like Google Glass, one of the biggest detractors from this thing actually becoming common. I could be way off, but we'll see. Find me a picture of Tim Cook wearing this thing. And just real quick, another small Apple-based update, because they had some varying opinions about ChatGPT. It looks like they've gotten a little bit closer with their integration, with Siri integration directly into the ChatGPT specific app. So if you've got the ChatGPT app installed on your iPhone, you can use Siri to summon the ChatGPT app. Looks like they also added some drag and drop capability and some other cool features. But let's move on to art. Let's talk about some art stuff, because we had some cool stuff take place in the AI art world this week. Now, first things first, let me show you these QR codes. So a Redditor put up this post, and each of these QR codes does actually function. It works. And while this is a novel idea, it's not exactly brand new technology. It's just a different way of utilizing something like Stable Diffusion. So whether it was through using ControlNet or various other tools, what they were able to do is probably convert one QR code into a picture that also just functions as a working QR code, which is really cool. And while the author didn't exactly explain what steps he used to recreate these, what he did explain was that QR codes and the technology behind them has a fixed type of feature. If it slightly misreads something, And so this error correction was hugely advantageous in making a working QR code from a picture like this. Now, we've talked about Runway ML many times. We talked about them last week and actually many weeks before that. I just really wanted to show you an update on where the technology is because the Gen 2 model is coming along quite well. And while it's still very far from perfect, as you can see, the coherency is getting better and better, it seemed like every time we take a look at it. I mean, look how smooth this guy slides right into the meeting. Look at that. Slides right in and out. But based on the quality of the stuff that we're seeing here, the improvements that we've seen, or even the stuff that's coming out of NVIDIA recently, based on how quickly things are moving, we may see some viable video clips maybe even by the end of this year. Now, on the topic of AI art, I have been a controversial figure in the past because I'm not really focused on the capitalism side of art as much as I am the art side of art. But for those who are very interested in ethically responsible AI, who want to know any use of AI, there is a collaboration platform called Magma. And from what I understand here, if you can kind of imagine a collaborative Photoshop with an AI art generator in it, and I guess the idea is enabling people to inspire each other, grow from each other, but the AI art generator will just simply block artist names, for example. And if you're an artist and you want to have your name blocked, you can have that in there too. If you do anything with AI on a certain layer, for example, it'll mark that whole layer as AI, so there's no funny business. Now, as someone who understands a little bit about diffusion models, I will say that just blocking a name of an artist doesn't necessarily block their artwork from being accessible. It doesn't block the inspiration from their artwork, their style, anything like that. But I think most people will look at this and think that this is a good thing and say, okay, glad Banksy's not being stolen from here. But the CEO of Magma is saying that AI is just one more tool to augment, not replace, creativity. What's most important to Magma is protecting artists and their work. So as we get closer to the end of today's video, I wanted to talk about AI art in the use of video games again. Because it seems like if you use anything AI or machine learning and you let your fan base know about it, they tend to freak out. We talk about the flack that System Shock got. We talked about the flack that Duke Nukem got because AI was used. Even though a professional artist was paid, people still got upset. And here we are looking at the newest installment in what may be the Myst series through Cyan Worlds. And people are up in arms that AI-assisted content was involved. For journals, logs, checklists, newspapers, all kinds of different content within the story, all kinds of different lore. Now, Cyan is being called the Myst creator for a game that came out in 1993. At this point, I can't tell you how many times it's been released, re-released, remastered. And maybe my perspective is weird, but I would rather see new content, new material, and play through a new world than play through yet another remaster, which is what these companies do when they can't generate ideas fast enough. Do you really want to play Far Cry 78 or Call of Duty 87? That's the direction that a lot of these things go because the companies have to stay profitable and they have to continually generate content for that to happen. While I appreciate and support the human artists as well, it's part of the reason we continue to get regurgitated content. This guy says, if I wanted AI to create a game, why am I paying a company to do that for me instead of doing it myself? And so let me address that, because you can't do this, not by yourself. You can't create a AAA title by yourself with nothing more than ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion. What do you think you're going to do? Major game studios involve programming, art assets, sound design, video tools, all kinds of different stuff, multiple different departments and skill sets that you don't have access to, unless you have AI-assisted tools that can potentially take out chunks of that workload for you. So eventually you can maybe make a game that's somewhat similar to this, but to act like you can do that right now it's just not realistic. And if it sounds like I'm just doing all this to defend Cyan Worlds, I'm not. I didn't enjoy the last remake of Myst. It was just better graphics over the same game that I've played for 30 years. And so yeah, if this helps them design a newer, better game, I'm all for it. And the last big thing I wanted to talk about in the world of AI art is going to be about Adobe and Firefly. So Adobe's got their Firefly model. It is copyright free, and now they're taking it to another level. They're giving enterprise customers, big companies, the ability to train the model specific to their company. The integration of Firefly directly into Photoshop appears to have been extremely profitable and popular, with 150 million generations at this point. But yeah, for a company to be able to take their company logos, company assets, company material, all that stuff, and train a model around that, it should unlock a lot of tools for them to be able to generate new stuff in a very similar way. In the white collar world, for example, let's say your company has a campaign going on. They can generate a version of a company logo that's specific to that campaign in a matter of moments because they'll have access to an AI model that's trained around their company material. And so while that right now might seem a little overkill or a little silly, as it becomes more and more accessible, it's going to become commonplace. And as I read here about this Sensei Gen AI platform, Firefly appears to focus on images, but it looks like Adobe even has access to things like large language models and other things. So we're going to want to keep tabs on Adobe to see what else they're going to come out with next, because this doesn't appear to be the end of the road. But for us and for today, this will be the end of the road. I really do appreciate the time you guys spent with me today. I really appreciate those of you who made it to the end of the video, just like always. If you have a chance to like, comment, subscribe, all those things really help the channel. And I really appreciate all that interaction. I had a crazy week last week, but I hopefully have some new videos that are going to be dropping very soon. But even in a worst case scenario, I'll see you every Friday for AI news, drama, and updates. Thanks for watching.